everyone, and welcome to our most recent assignment for the sophomore poetry research paper. Okay, so up to this point, you have selected a volume of poetry. You have put together a listing of 5 critics in a works cited form. You also just submitted your thesis paragraph, which states what theme you're going to be exploring and what 3 poems you're going to be exploring it in. So now it's time for a revision of your works cited page. Originally, if you remember, you had 6 entries on it. You had 1 for the primary source, and that would be the volume of poetry itself. Let's say it's a collection of poetry from Robert Frost, or a collection of poetry from Langston Hughes or Emily Dickinson. So you had 1 from the primary source, and that will still be on your revised works cited page. That's not going to change. However, what will change are the secondary sources. In other words, now that you've selected your theme, you have to go back and find out, are these critics going to be the kind of authors that I can draw upon during the course of my paper? Or do I need to go back to the Gale group, to go back to the library resources, to go back to the Bloom's Literature and Poetry for Students and all those other kind of search engines, and find people that are going to be commenting on my specific theme? So if you're doing something about the loss of innocence, for example, and your author is Emily Dickinson, do your critics say something about the loss of innocence? Do they talk about the need for growing up or the pain that's experienced when facing reality? If that's the case, then you can keep those critics. You're in good shape. But what we're trying to narrow down our scope into being is 3 separate individuals, 3 separate critics, not 5 anymore, only 3, who have some impact or make some comment on your selected topic. Okay, so if you're covering the power of nature in Robert Frost's poetry, you want to find critics that are talking about nature. Even if they don't necessarily pinpoint exactly what you're saying, but if they're addressing it, you can weave that in with your own words. And don't worry if your critics don't actually pinpoint the exact 3 poems that you're going to be exploring. Remember, we're looking at this thematically. So as long as they address the theme, you could tie it into a particular poem. So if I take a moment to just examine, let's say this was the first submittal, and you have your primary source right here, so you're going to definitely keep that. And you're still going to have your last name and page number and the words works cited centered. But now, out of all of these, actually this is also a primary source. The student wasn't able to find this particular poem in the original volume, so she or he had to go and find it separately online. Anyway, here are the critics now: Hildebrand, Marshall, an unnamed critic, Preston, and an unnamed critic here. If all of them are addressing your topic, and let's say your topic is about the healing power of nature, then really the only adjustments you're making for Tuesday's submittal is editing changes, underlining or italics, punctuation marks, proper spacing, things like that. But if you know for sure, let's say that Edward Marshall doesn't say anything about nature in his introduction, you could just get rid of Marshall because you're not going to consult him in the paper. Or if you're dealing with this meet William Cullen Bryant and that's just too general, you can get rid of that. So maybe Preston says something about isolation and you're tying it into nature, and Thanatopsis is actually one of your poems and they definitely address the idea of nature, and here it actually specifies nature. So I've got my 3 critics then, and I've got my primary source. So that's all you're doing for this next step on the process. You're just revising your Works Cited page so that it does reflect, let's put it this way, I'll write this down. Make sure your Works Cited page reflects the critics you will be consulting in your final paper. And how many do you need total? You just need 3. And hopefully what you will do with those 3, one critical commentary, let's say, per poem. That's the reason why this is called a research paper, because you're researching what these critics are saying, and hopefully now you've got 3 who will comment on your particular theme. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I can answer any questions that you may have in class tomorrow, but that's all you're doing, resubmitting your Works Cited page so that it reflects the people that you're going to be consulting in the final submittal, in the final paper itself. Remember, you're not allowed to use critics that come from book rags, Schmoop, 123, Essay Me, and all those other kind of crazy, quacky things that are out there. Stick with the library resources. Stick with Gale. Stick with Poetry for Students. Stick with Literature Resource Center. And stick with Bloom's Lit. Okay, good luck.